because especially fishermen are really guilty of this. People like to exaggerate, tell stories. Yeah. We're all guilty of this, yeah, to a certain extent. But does anyone recognize? Well, I won't ruin it. So this photo says Queen of the Naga. A Naga is a mythical serpent-like fish in the Mekong, seized by the American Army in the Mekong River, Laos, 1973. And so you see this photo all around Thailand, and people think that this is the largest fish in the Mekong, and maybe the largest fish out there. But yeah, so do people recognize this fish?
Yeah.
So it's an oarfish, and this photo was actually taken in San Diego in 1991. And someone took it, so it's a real fish, a real photo that matches really well with some of the stories and folklore that you hear in Southeast Asia. And so just by relabeling it and putting, anyone read Thai? But yeah, by relabeling it, then it created this whole additional myth and folklore about this fish that people really thought was true. So I sort of recognized that in order to get information about these fish, it was going to be necessary. It was going to be necessary to go to around the world with the help. I mean, luckily there are organizations like National Geographic who would help support this. To a lot of the large rivers and lakes around the world, so to the Mekong, the Yangtze, the Murray-Darling, the Nile, Paraná in South America, the Amazon. So it's traveling around the world and gathering information about these big fish. So the question was kind of like, are there other big fish out there like the Mekong giant catfish, and are they equally imperiled? And the answer to both those questions turns out to be yes. Another issue that I came up with very quickly is that everyone has heard of a marine biologist, and there are thousands of scientists that study sharks, marine fish, big marine fish. But there's almost nobody studying big freshwater fish on a global scale. So we have a really good appreciation of what's happening with marine mammals and marine fish, what's happening in the oceans on a global scale. But in terms of looking at freshwater, there's almost nobody doing this type of work, which I have my opinions about why that is. I think it's primarily because we think of rivers and lakes as local, and we focus on the rivers and lakes around where we live, whereas the ocean, we sort of inherently can view it as more global and more international, and something that we look at a bigger scale. But it's too bad for these fish because it means that we are not tracking them, we don't know much about them, and unfortunately, many of them are close to extinction.
Just wondering, there's a local place near where I live, near in the foothills beneath Yosemite, and they have an operation on the Mekong. It's called Fish Bio.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do you work with them at all?
Yeah, I'll talk about them. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And so we sort of started this work. The first grant in 2003, that big giant catfish was caught in 2005 in Thailand. And then in 2007, we started filming a show called Monster Fish. And the format for Monster Fish, as of 6 months ago, this show was still available on so it's not Disney, it's on National Geographic's National Geographic channel online. As of 6 months ago, you could still watch them all. So from 2007 to 2019, we filmed Monster Fish. Excuse me. And the format of the show, each show, we focus on a different species of big fish. We'd go out with a team of 5 people for 2 weeks and go to each of these locations and learn everything we could about these big fish species. And essentially we did that by going out with local scientists and local fishermen, trying to catch the fish and trying to learn all that we could.
What is it on now?
What is?
Is it available? Right
It's
now?
just on National Geographic online. So in there, I think we did about 35 shows. So as of 6 months ago, they were still available. I was actually paying for them on like Hulu or something, and then I went on National Geographic and I saw they were free, and I felt kind of silly. But yeah, I have a 6-year-old, so my son wasn't very interested in these shows until about a year ago, and now he likes watching them. So we go out fishing, and we didn't do that until he was about
Nat
5.
Geo didn't give you a box set of your own.
Yeah, so they did, but they're DVDs. So I don't know. What do you do with the DVD now?
That's cool.
Have a DVD player. Everybody? I have one.
We have one in our
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I have all the DVDs, but and so just one thing to say about this. What I really liked about doing the shows, there are lots of things that were, as someone who doesn't come from this background at all, I was a PhD student at Davis, or I had just finished when we started doing these shows. What I really liked about the shows is that, before we might be out in the middle of the Mekong, right in the middle of Phnom Penh or something, the tonle sap flows right through Phnom Penh, and would be with one of these big fish at 2 a.m. I mean, this really happened. So we had a Mekong giant catfish. One of the only times that year when it had been caught, 500-pound fish. We're struggling to kind of get it out of the net and get it back in the river. And there would be 5 of us there, research team. So there'd be a few fishermen and a few people from the research team. And nobody would know that that was even happening. No one had an appreciation that there was this 600-pound fish living in this river. And so the shows, by having the camera there and by having National Geographic involved, all of a sudden we could share these stories with people all over the world. And so that was my favorite thing about doing the shows. My least favorite thing about doing the shows was when they would tell me to do things over again, which happens a lot. And sometimes it can be really hard, oh, jump in the water again and grab the fish. I'm like, well, you can do it one time, it's hard to do twice.
Question.
Yeah.
Did you ever run into Jeremy Wade?
So I've worked with him on at conferences, or we've been like speakers together.
Wow.
He started primarily working in South America, and I started in Asia, and then and we were filming at the same time, and then kind of halfway through, like around season 4, he kind of switched to Asia and I switched to South. This wasn't on purpose, but it just sort of happened. And so I never actually saw him in the field, but he filmed with a lot of the same people that we filmed with in Asia after we did. And then when I went to South America, every time I would go anywhere in South America, they'd say, oh, Jeremy Wade was just here or whatever. So
That's something that I always ping ponged you guys like against each other. Like, okay, well, I know he's Animal Planet, right? And you guys are Nat Geo. I was like,
yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, anybody who's watched both of the shows, he really's into fishing, and I was sort of approaching it more from curiosity and kind of biologist standpoint. So in Monster Fish, we fish, but it's not really a fishing show, and Jeremy really gets into it.
The thrills of freshwater horrors.
Yeah.
it seems more dramatic.
It was more dramatic, and he, I think Jeremy, river monsters, right? People like river monsters because, he would talk a lot about, it was dramatic, people liked it for that reason, but also he talks a lot about different techniques and things of ways to fish. So I think people who fish, if they could get over the drama, like that program, because then they could, one of the things that happened, I'm a little embarrassed about, but it happens sometimes. But sometimes our team, like our film team in Monster Fish, none of us. I love fish. I like fishing and stuff, but we're not like really, really technical about it. And so sometimes, like halfway through the scene, the fishing rod would change color. So I'd be like, oh, I got a huge fish. It'd be like a red fishing rod, and then like the next second I have a yellow fishing rod, and I'm like, because it all gets edited, and I don't, I was involved in the filming and in the research and everything, but I'm not like involved with every cut, and I'm like, come on, guys.
Couldn't all just have the same fishing poles?
I always wore this, like even now I just always wear the same clothes. So for 2 weeks I would wear exactly the same thing. because otherwise they can't cut it right. Because sometimes we would catch, they always want to end with the biggest fish. And sometimes we catch the biggest fish on the first day.
Yeah.
And so then it's, I mean, no one likes it when that happens because it's kind of messes with your head if you have to then work backward. But a lot of times, surprising amount of times, you catch the biggest fish on the last day. But I remember one show we caught the biggest fish on the first day. And so then the whole time we were there, we always had to think about what the end of the show is going to be. But overall, it was a good experience. I mean, what a wonderful, unexpected opportunity to be able to travel around and film these fish. Another thing we did that was maybe you guys could appreciate is because we were filming them, we always made a big effort to get underwater, as much underwater footage as we could. And I really loved, that was my favorite part of the show because you can't talk, there's no pressure to do anything. When we were filming underwater, you're very focused on the fish and what it's like under there. And so those are some of my favorite times. We would spend a couple days each show just underwater looking for the fish, and I really enjoyed that. So now I'll just kind of give an update on what happened since, initially going into starting the project in 2005. When I went to the Mekong for my Fulbright, that was in 1997, there were plans to build all these big dams on the Mekong. Well, since then, those dams have been built, some of them, three of them, many in China, and then Zaiburi and 2 or 3 others in the lower Mekong. And so it's starting to cause a lot of issues, not only for these big endangered fish, but also for the fishery overall. And so these are some stories from a few years ago about the issues or the problems that these dams are causing on the Mekong. One of the things that we did that someone asked about earlier is the idea was to tag these big giant catfish to see if they needed to migrate, like salmon and sturgeon, to see if they needed to migrate past the area where the dams are being built in order to spawn. Because if they have to migrate past where the dams are, they build a dam, there's a good chance the fish could go extinct. So I do have some videos. I skipped one video already because we didn't totally figure out the audio, but I'm going to give this a try. So this is a video from northern Thailand. These the fishermen that I was working with, I started working with them in 1997. We were able to tag the first fish in 2007, so it took 10 years. Yes?
Do they install fish ladders at any of those dams?
The dams do have fish ladders.
10-foot.
Yeah, it's a different design. So like the Moon River in Thailand, the Saesan River in Cambodia, some of these dams, the older dams were built with like the ones that you see for salmon, where the fish have to jump. What they've been installing more recently are called vertical slot. So it's rather than something that the fish have to jump, there'll be a pool, and then there's a vertical slot that goes all the way down. And so those are designed, I think they first started using them in Australia, but they're designed for fish that don't jump. But generally speaking, my experience is that for most of these fish ladders aren't very effective. And I have a colleague this is just one example. This is an extreme example, but she was studying catfish migrations in the Amazon. She tagged 2,000 fish, and not a single one of them, and these are highly migratory fish, not a single one of them used the ladder to get past the dam. So they're not always as effective as you would hope. So I'm going to show probably just this one video, and we'll see if the audio works or not. This is just gives you a sense of the fishermen that catch the giant catfish in northern Thailand. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
First we heard they were fishing, and then we heard they weren't, and now we've heard they're fishing again. So we're going to go out to the island where they fish and check it out.
Very successful.
This is an island on the Mekong. On one side is Thailand, and on the other side is Laos. When I camp out with these guys, this is the camp of the fishers that caught the record catfish in 2005. We'll see if they can do it again this year. That's been ribbed on the fire. So I recognize a lot of these guys from years past. Last year, a lot of the fishers decided that because the giant catfish populations have declined, they were going to stop fishing. And the people that I'm seeing here tonight are the ones that didn't want to stop fishing. So they have their permission to fish from the Department of Fisheries. I'm going to try to convince them to release one of the giant catfish that they catch so that I can tag it and then follow its migration upstream. But I've worked with these guys before. They're fishermen. They sell the fish that they catch, so it's going to be hard to convince them. They're not bad guys, but the problem I have is that when they catch a fish, most of the time the fish dies. I put so much effort into this trip. Its whole success is now tied with this band of merry men. One of the guys just went over to Laos and bought back 6 liters of whiskey and a bunch of plastic bags. It's gonna be a long night. 50 cents a liter.
Oh my gosh, that's the good stuff.
Smooth as usual. A rough batch. Out here on the river, being able to hold your drink gets you a long way in negotiations. It's raining, it's getting dark, and I think they're kind of drunk. They're gonna see if they can catch a giant catfish. Engine's cool. The engine's not starting, and we keep floating like this, we're gonna end up in Laos. Doesn't sound good. The battery's dead. We gotta go back up. For these guys, fishing and drinking goes hand in hand. They're gonna teach me how to play cards. Oh, this is good. I think I won that time, but apparently if you lose, everyone gets to hit you. Rain. Great for the catfish running. But this morning my head hurts. But I think last night I convinced them to let me release the fish if they catch one.
Hey.
It was over. Oh, you can watch the whole show. But a few days after that, they did catch a fish, and they allowed us to tag it and release it, and we were able to track it and followed it about 20 kilometers upstream to where we think that they spawn. And that also kind of the fishermen kind of agreed with that assessment that they spawn nearby. When they catch females, the females are very close to spawning when they catch them at that site. So everyone sort of thought that they spawned pretty close to that area. So we tracked the fish up to the confluence of the Mekong and a big tributary. And according to kind of local knowledge, that was an area where people said that they thought that they spawned. The second fish I'd like to talk about, kind of an unusual example, freshwater stingray. So as most of you may know, there are a lot of species of freshwater stingray in South America, but also the three of the largest freshwater fish in the world are species of freshwater stingray. So you have the giant freshwater stingray in Southeast Asia. That's, reports, not verified, but reports of fish up to 1,000 kilos, not 1,000 kilos, 1,000 pounds. And this is a fish, this is kind of an unusual fish because I was focusing on freshwater. There are populations of this fish that I was studying that are restricted to freshwater, but then you also see this species in coastal areas as well. Well, it doesn't appear that the ones that are resident in freshwater, it doesn't appear that they're moving. They're restricted to freshwater. But the species and there are other species of stingray like this. I'm thinking about like certain species in Florida that have the ability, they don't have to move back and forth to complete their life cycle, but they're able to move back and forth.
How do you find them?
So have you ever seen Jaws? So the cool, you can fish with these with rod and reel, but the way that the locals fish for these is you get a big barrel, so you get a huge hook, a huge piece of bait, a big barrel. You throw the bait in, leave it overnight, and then you go out the next day and the barrel's like swimming around. And so you go out, get the barrel, and then pull the fish up. Catching them is hard because they're so strong. They'll break gear, they'll tow boats around. But the struggle that we had more than catching them is how to handle them after, we want to tag them. And so how can you handle a fish like that? This one you'll see is in a kiddie pool. So it's like, what do you do with it? So we bought a big kiddie pool, filled it full of water, and then that way we could do our work with the fish in the pool, and then we get like 8 or 10 guys. We use plastic tarps with a little bit of water in them, and so you use plastic tarps, everyone would lift up the tarp and then move it. I think there's a video of that. So this, I'm not gonna show this whole video, but this just gives you a sense for how big and powerful these fish are. So this is in central Thailand. So someone has to grab the tail, and then we wrap it. That wasn't my job.
Is that a gar?
Does someone have the tail yet? Oh, there they got it.
Was that a gar in there?
So you just wrap the tail like that.
Like a gar in there.
Yeah, there was a gar, so that's a exotic
Okay.
gar, or they find them in Thailand. But beautiful fish.
Wow.
And then another fish for people who are looking for something to study that we don't know anything about, short-tailed river ray. This is one of the largest vertebrates in South America. Can get up to, we think, about 500 pounds. Very, very little research on this species. This photo was taken in the Paraná River in South America. Beautiful, beautiful fish. And then finally, anyone recognize this species?
Yeah, I have a smaller one.
Oh yeah, so this is a Wells catfish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So this is Europe's largest freshwater fish.
Yeah.
And this is one of 2 species that stick out in my mind that are not endangered because they've been introduced to a lot of new areas. This is a native of Eastern Europe. It's been introduced all throughout Western Europe and kind of taken over lots of rivers in Western Europe. And so the story goes that a German angler took 30 young fish. We talked to this man and he said that he did this. Took 30 young fish in the back of his car, drove them from East Germany to the Ebro River in Spain and released them in the Ebro. And we were involved with researchers there doing a survey, and now the catfish are 90% of the biomass in the Ebro River, fish biomass. So that's a river that didn't used to have any catfish at all. So they really take over. They have big mouths. They'll eat anything. You'll see pictures if you look online. With basketballs in their mouths, and they eat ducks and salmon, freshwater eel.
Those people.
Yeah. This is one of the only.
What's its mouth?
That's his hands.
His hand.
I had gloves on. These are one of the only fish that I dealt with. None of these fish are dangerous, but this is one of the only fish I dealt with that will actually seem like it gets mad. And if you're messing with it, it will turn. Sharks will do this too. Like alligators and crocodiles will do this, but fish don't usually do this. But this is one of the only fish I've seen that will actually turn and just bite you.
That's not what Jeremy says.
Yeah. Almost. Yeah, no, almost. This is the only one that I've ever seen do that. I have none of these other fish display aggressive behavior.
Is this the species that eats the pigeons on the back?
Yeah. So yeah, we did 2 shows about Wells catfish. One of them was just kind of talking about their spread and how big they can get, and then the second show we did. So there's a famous spot in France where you can sit up on a bridge, and the whales have learned how to beach themselves and eat pigeons. And so you can watch them from the bridge, and they'll jump up on the bank and grab a pigeon and go back down.
Is there
Aren't
any
there,
fishermen for that?
Is there?
Any fishermen catching them from the beach?
No, you can, so we caught, that was the scene where I switched fishing rods. But we caught like an 8-footer just right in that same area. We weren't fishing, we didn't wanna mess up, that's kind of like a unique natural history behavior thing, so we didn't wanna mess that up, but we caught a big one downstream from there.
How do they taste?
The wells, they're big,
Very good.
yeah. I tend not to eat any of these. I just have too much like emotionally invested. But yeah, whales are popular food fish. A lot of these fish are obviously popular food fish. The funny thing about the whales and the pigeon is that like neither of them were good. Like the pigeons were oblivious, and the whales like couldn't figure out how to. So it's just like this comedy. The whales will miss. And then the pigeon just go right back down. And
Aren't there a couple of similar species in Southeast Asia? They're not whales, but they're whales-like.
Well, so there's wallago.
Yeah,
Uh,
is what I was
A
thinking.
wallago, will jump to eat. things.
Anatomically, they're similar too, and they look alike.
They look similar, kind of basic body shape.
Whales is the big one, another big one though.
Wallago, so there are 3 big species of wallago in the Mekong, and I think they all get up to about 100 kilos, which is pretty dang big fish, but I think they all get up to 200 pounds. Yeah, so after 20 years, what have we kind of figured out? Started with a list of about 20 fish that grow over 6 feet long or 200 pounds. Now that list is up to about 40. So there are a lot of fish that can get as big as a person. This is air-breathing arapaima in South America. So one of the biggest fish in South America, like that freshwater stingray. It's a diverse assemblage of fish: sturgeon, freshwater stingrays, big carp, giant catfish, arapaima, alligator gar, paddlefish, all kinds of crazy and interesting fish that can get really big. These fish are not dangerous. Just have to emphasize that. I was terrified. I saw Jaws when I was very young, and I was terrified of water and a fish like this. But after working with them for 20 years, alligator gar, you could be in a swimming pool with 50 of big ones, and they wouldn't bite you or bother you at all.
That's what she said.
I mean, I'm trying to think, like, freshwater sawfish. Most of these fish, you would literally have to either grab one, generally speaking, just don't grab a wild animal, or physically get in the way of it. Sawfish, if you get in the way of them, they get kind of freaked out and they start whacking their saw around. Oh, yeah.
Would they bite you?
If you stuck your hand in its mouth.
So like.
But if you like,
if
I was
you
holding
walk,
it like that, it
like
wouldn't.
they're
They
not
won't bite you.
aggressive.
No.
If you walk by them.
No, they won't bite you at all. No.
Except for small girls,
If you put your hand, pretty much anything, any animal, if you put your hand in its mouth, it will bite you. Yeah, and this is one of ours. This is an American
Is
paddlefish.
it like a Pinocchio fish?
So they use that big rostrum to look for prey, like plankton, and they have a mouth like a basking shark that they open to filter plankton out of the water.
Did you ever? I know they're considered extinct in the wild now. Did you ever get a chance to work with Chinese paddlefish?
Yeah, so that's the next slide.
He teed that up.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah.
How deep underwater was that fish?
Oh, so these photos, these are just photos that I took as part of the project. So the paddlefish are cultured in the U.S. And so I went to like University of Kentucky or somewhere, and they have these in a pond. They're breeding them, and so this was a baby, and we had a big tank that had a black background. Maybe some of you guys do this too. And so this fish was actually in a tank. So we took it out of a pond, put it in a big tank to take a photo, and then we let it go. So it's cool because it's a live fish.
How large is this baby?
It's probably 2 feet long, I would guess.
It's a good size. Wow.
So like half of me.
Yes.
Half of you, Eleanor.
So yeah, so the Chinese paddlefish, another kind of big take-home message from this work is that yes, most of these fish are imperiled, they're in danger of extinction. And this, unfortunately, the Chinese paddlefish, the only other species of paddlefish in the world, unfortunately, is the first one of these big fish to be declared officially extinct. It was declared extinct, I believe, in 2022.
Captivity too, or
What's that?
extinct in captivity too, or?
Yeah, so totally gone. So like, there was no captive breeding, so as best we know, it's gone forever, which is, these are fish that have been around for millions and millions and millions of years, so it's kind of sad to see them go. For a fish like the Mekong giant catfish, every fish is a little bit different, but Mekong giant catfish, there are a lot of captive populations, so even if it was to go extinct in the Mekong, it wouldn't disappear entirely, which is always nice. It gives us another few thousand years to figure it out, try to get our rivers back in good shape. Another, obvious take-home message from this is how important fish are to people. Working in the Mekong, people are getting 60 to 70% of their protein from fish. So not only are these, amazing fish, these big fish are indicators of river health and indicators of the fishery, and these fisheries are very important to people all over the world.
So the Mekong is being bred in captivity now.
The Mekong giant catfish, yeah.
Is there any I know it's like with salmon and steelhead, aquaculture fish normally acclimate well to water river sheds and watersheds.
Yeah.
Has there been any idea of possibly restoring populations of catfish?
Yeah, so you're teeing me up for all my stuff I have to say. So that's why I say we need 1,000 years, because we tried it once and it didn't work very well. So we released 2,000 catfish into the Tonle Sap Lake 2 years ago, and within like 3 days, 90% of them had been caught and eaten. So like the fishermen, we released them in a fish reserve, but it's a fish reserve that exists in the middle of a larger lake. So it's just basically an area of the lake where no fishing is allowed. And within like a week, 90% of those fish that we released in that reserve moved outside of the reserve and were caught.
Got thrown to the wolves, didn't have cold turkey and
yeah. So we actually tried again. I kind of like a kind of just see what happens kind of person, rather than trying to get it perfect the very first time. But so we tried it again. That was during the dry season in a shallow lake, in a reserve. But in retrospect, dry season, shallow lake is not the best place. We weren't giving the fish the best chance. We tried it again in the rainy season in a deep pool. These deep pools in the Mekong can be up to 250 feet deep. So we tried again in a deep pool in the Mekong River proper, and very few of those fish were recaptured. So we're doing. There are lots of cases of fish being successfully reintroduced. We haven't managed to do it in the Mekong yet, but it's work in progress.
Yeah, honing the techniques and protocols.
Yeah.
That was just like because a lot of it too is, has there been any ideas about no catch limits? I know that's kind of impractical.
Yeah.
They did it with redfish.
Yeah. My next slide. And another sort of take home is that these fish have an image problem. So people, not necessarily in this group, but these fish are food. A lot of people view them as food, not as wildlife or wild animals. Many people think that they're not the prettiest fish in the world. Yes.
So if these fish are getting gigantic, obviously they're probably the top predator in that local ecosystem. Does that mean that they would have the same sort of bioaccumulation problems that giant predator fish have in the ocean, where they're accumulating mercury, lead, etc.?
Yeah, potentially. Not all. Mekong giant catfish is an algae eater. Paddlefish is a planktivore, so they're not necessarily top predators, but a lot of them are. And in ecosystems where there's a lot of heavy metals, then they would accumulate. It's not, we've looked at it in the Mekong. Because there's not a lot of pollution in the Mekong, we don't see big issues with that, but yes, it potentially would be. And then kind of another issue, and this is what we work with, a lot of the work I do at the university is we need fresh water, we need water for our purposes as well. Hydropower is a big way that we get electricity. It also causes big problems for fish. And so it's like, how do you find a balance? How do you maximize the benefit that we get from things like dams and minimize the environmental costs so we don't cause all these fish to go extinct? And it's certainly something that we struggle with in the US and in California and Nevada.
I have a question on the issue of the dam.
Yeah.
So California right now is removing several dams
Yeah,
on the Aquarium River.
yeah.
Which I think, that's great. Are you aware of any other ventures in America looking at that?
Yeah.
Or internationally? Are there
Yeah. Dam removal is big right now. There was a dam removed on the White Salmon River up in Washington. They saw salmon come back. There were 2 dams that were removed up on the Olympic Peninsula. They've seen good restoration and impacts from that. There was a series of dams. Penobscot. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
So there were a series of dams on the Penobscot that were removed, and there have been a lot of benefits to migratory fish there. So this is and then the Klamath, dam removal, it typically is very expensive.
Yes.
And so there are a lot of dams that don't serve any purpose anymore. It just costs so much to remove them that's the obstacle. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the Klamath. I think there's a lot of optimism right now that the salmon and sturgeon populations will come back when those dams come out. So
Are you aware, internationally, has the focus currently been more on how do we make dams better versus removal or reevaluation?
it's everything. So removal tends to be the focus when you have dams that are obsolete or that are
Maintenance costs.
Yeah, so in the Europe and the US, we have older dams. A lot of them are obsolete. We know that they are causing big problems for fish and for recreation, whatever. In places where dams are still actively being built, like Amazon, Southeast Asia, they're potentially, it's either operation, how are they operated, where are they located, how are they designed? So the kind of different ways you can approach it. So coming full circle, this is what I've been working on for the last few years. In 2017, after as we were winding down filming Monsterfish, we started a big project funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development in the Mekong region. And the project is called Wonders of the Mekong. We have a really well built out Facebook page. If you'd like to, you can learn so much about the project if you check us out on Facebook. And so it's focused on this amazing biodiversity, the amazing fisheries, the amazing hydrology and ecosystems of the Mekong River. And so we have a team, we work with a big team in Cambodia. We support about 15 graduate students and scientists in Cambodia. And we work in partnership with them to learn about and to highlight the values and the importance of a healthy Mekong River system. This is just one example. Someone was asking about tagging. We used acoustic tags to tag 300 fish over the last 2 years. This is a fish called a 7-striped barb, really beautiful fish that can get up to about 150 pounds. And so this is one of the fish that we tag. We track them, use listening devices that are about the size of a big thermos. And we have these listening devices all up and down the river. And then the fish swim and they emit a signal. And then these thermos-sized listening devices that are underwater can pick up the fish as they move up and down the river. And so we were actually able to show movement across the Cambodia-Laos border. We showed, some fish making movements past where these proposed dams are. We showed movement from the Mekong River into tributaries, also where there are plans for dams. And then another cool example, this gets back to this extinction and possibility of captive breeding and stuff. This is a fish called the giant salmon carp. They can get up to 6 feet long. And none of them had been seen since 2005. And so it was feared extinct. And in the last 2 years, we've had 3 new reports of this fish. So this fish does not exist in captivity. There's no captive breeding for it. we thought it was the first one of these big fish in the Mekong to go extinct, but we found 3 in the last 2 years. So now we're making a big effort. Where are they? How can we find more? Can we find one alive? The 3 that we found so far have been dead because they were caught. Yeah.
Sturgeons were once named no, they were once well, I forgot.
So as part of those 300 fish that were tagged, we started hearing reports of really big stingray in Cambodia. At first we were working on a project in Thailand. This is in Cambodia. Fishermen were saying they caught 300, 400, 500 kilo stingray in Cambodia. And so we were able to tag and release 3 big stingray. This is the first one that we tagged. And this is how we keep them on tarps like this, but you can just see what it looks like. This was after the fish had been tagged and we were releasing it back to the river. And this was a nice video because all the community members were really excited to see it released. So you can hear them saying, bye bye.
Wow.
That is super cool.
Yeah, he waves his tail. And these were all big females. So yeah, it was really cool.
In a fantasy setting, somebody could ride that into battle.
It's 3 big females, and then about 4 months after that video was taken, the fishermen caught this one, which was a 661-pound female, which broke the previous record for the world's largest freshwater fish. And so the exciting thing about this, I mean, it's exciting for a number of reasons. One, given the amount of fishing and all the other threats and pressures to the Mekong, how do these things survive? That giant catfish that was caught was butchered and sold for meat. This fish was tagged and released. We're still tracking it. So we know where this fish is right now. And she's staying, it's a large female, she's staying in a little 3-kilometer stretch of river in northern Cambodia that the community has set aside as a no fishing area. And so that maybe is one reason why she's still out there is smart fish. And the Mekong giant catfish is highly migratory. We're starting to think that maybe these stingray are not as migratory as other big fish like the giant catfish.
Yeah,
So she's smart.
there's like the red drum I mentioned. It was an endangered species, and it was almost exclusively caused by overfishing for blackened redfish, a dish in the southeast. They were able to put a no catch limit on, no catch, all catch and release fishery on the red drum, and it delisted the red drum. And then now they've got a slot limit so they can make the black and red fish, and they've got a healthy population of red drum now. And some of these fish, like especially like the Mekong catfish, that can be bred in captivity. Starting new populations, possibly having like a no catch limit until the population starts to recover. And then if the fishermen have to have food fish, maybe having like a slot limit of like 1 or 2 year old fish or something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the more information we have, then the more it's possible
On a fecundity level,
to do management like that.
Does the Alaska government care or not so much?
Every country is different. Cambodia has been a pretty easy place to work. Thailand is a wonderful place to work, but the regulations for foreign researchers make it really difficult for someone like me to work there. And then in Laos, it's very top-down, kind of autocratic, and they're very focused on hydropower. So it's not as easy to work in Laos. So Cambodia has turned out to be the easiest. Not only is it a very important area for these fish, but it has turned out to be easier to work there than in other countries. We're actually trying to expand this project to all 4, to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. If we get funding, we will be able to do that. The governments are interested enough to allow us to do the work. in Cambodia, it tends to be the easiest, just in terms of general stuff.
Hey Zeb.
Yeah.
Have you done any genetic work on like the different populations of stingray? Like, are they interbreeding with one another? Are they are the Cambodian ones like a separate?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that. One of kind of the best known Thai taxonomists is named Chavalit, and he believes that there are several species, but no one's really done definitive genetic work. And we don't have like a, I worked in a lab, I was gonna say we don't just have a lab that we work with where we have like good like workflow. We'll do a lot of tagging work and we figured out how to do it, but with the genetic work I just don't have a lab right now that we're working with, but all of that work needs to be done. And we're taking samples, so we have samples. We've established a fish collection in Cambodia. We have samples, fin clips and in alcohol of like 120 different species. So we're gearing up and kind of excited about doing some of that work, but we haven't done it yet.
Is it a monetary issue or you just haven't found?
It's partially monetary, but it's also partially just not knowing who to work with.
You know, Davis has the genetic verification laboratory.
Yeah.
They're kind of busy, but
Yeah, and I did part of my PhD in that lab, so I need to reach out to them. We're having a 10-year reunion this summer that I haven't RSVP'd for yet, but I really need to reach out to them because that's the kind of work that they do. But you just need to find like the right situation. I don't know, academic research is kind of strange because it revolves right place, right time. You have the money, people need to be excited about the work, they need to have time to do the work, so
yeah.
I would like to follow up.
Question.
Yeah.
So in a lot of these areas, you think it's more effective to focus conservation efforts on like top-down governmental policies or changing the local community's popular opinion?
The local community stuff is pretty straightforward because in my experience, especially in Southeast Asia, the local communities are on board. Like they depend on the resource, they understand the rarity of these fish. Like most of these fish they've never seen before. So if they catch one, it's like you think it's like, oh, it's food, but they've never, like it's the first time a 50-year-old fisherman has seen one of these fish. So we compensate them at market rate for the fish when we tag them so that there's not a disincentive to work with us. But the communities, they rely on the river, so they're pretty easy to work with. The government, it's basically like the main issue are the development decisions that are being made. And so you have these top-down development decisions, like hydropower is a great example of this. The hydropower decisions, and we did this we do this in the US too, but like the development decisions are not really taking into account how important a healthy river is to people and to fish. And so the main objective is to just try to get like the fishery and the biodiversity as part of the conversation when the decisions are being made. A lot of these dams, you'll see there's a dam in one area where we work. It's like the absolute worst place to put a dam from a fisheries and biodiversity perspective. And it's not going to generate that much electricity, but it just has to do with politics. There's a politician in Laos who found a source of money from Vietnam, and it's in an isolated area. It's sort of, construction started during COVID, and these things kind of happen a lot of times in like back channel ways, and environmental considerations just aren't part of the equation. But on that note, when this big stingray was caught, the Prime Minister of Cambodia posted about it on his Facebook, or I don't know if this is Twitter or Facebook. I'm not the best with social media. One of them, maybe both. And they issued a proclamation saying that area would be protected. In December of 2023, the new Prime Minister of Cambodia reaffirmed a commitment not to build mainstream dams on the Mekong River for 10 years. So that was a really good announcement. If Cambodia sticks to that, it means that there's 10 years for alternative energy, you know, other options to become more economically feasible. It gives researchers 10 more years to learn about the fish. It gives us 10 more years to try to figure out what's going on with the giant salmon carp and where its populations are. So that 10 years is a very positive development. Presumably, alternatives to hydropower will, the price of those will come down. Another kind of good news story is, contrary to a lot of places in the US where reproduction is no longer possible, so you don't see sturgeon reproducing or you don't see alligator gar reproducing, in the Mekong you still see young fish. So that's a sign that the river's not broken yet. Like when you get a really broken river, you stop seeing reproduction. Fish are the environment is no longer conducive to reproduction. We still see young fish that's a baby giant carp, giant stingray, and giant catfish. And we've also seen fishermen now with social media, they're releasing fish on their own. So we've seen this now like probably 5 times last year, where in some remote area, fishermen will catch one of these fish. They heard about these fish and they know they're rare. They've never seen one. And so they'll actually take a video of themselves releasing the fish back into the river. So that's been really cool.
Do these large fish handle capture and release pretty well?
Depends on how they're caught. This fish was caught in a bag net, which they don't deal with very well. The ones that have been being released, like the last year, were caught in big beach seines. And the beach seine they deal well with capturing a beach seine. Beach seine, it just kind of corrals them. They never, they're never pulled out of the water, and the fish can swim around. And so it depends on how they're caught. The stingray, I was surprised. So I wasn't there when that record stingray was caught. That was Fish Bio. Someone asked about Fish Bio.
That was nice.
So Fish Bio was the lead on that big, we work with Fish Bio, but they had a team there when that big stingray was caught. And that stingray was out of the water because they wanted to weigh it. Not Fish Bio, the fishermen wanted to weigh it. And that stingray was out of the water, for at least a couple of minutes and handled just because it was so big and the fishermen were just trying to deal with it. I don't think it was handled all that gently, and all of those stingrays that we tagged survived. So it's also species dependent. The stingrays seem pretty tough. Yeah?
Yeah, we had a case here in Sacramento where they caught some poachers, sturgeon poachers right here in Sacramento. And in the back of the pickup truck, there was a female that had been out of the water for over 2 hours. Then bludgeoned, was all bloody, and survived.
Yeah, sturgeon are really tough too. We were filming up on the Fraser, and one of the sturgeon that we caught had been. They had tagging data. It had been caught 27 times previously. Another kind of good news story are fish reserves, freshwater fish reserves. There are thousands of community-sized fish reserves all throughout Southeast Asia. This is a video of a fish reserve in northern India for golden mahseer. Just play a few seconds of the video. But this is a pool. These aren't big reserves, but in the reserves, research has shown you get higher diversity, more biomass, and bigger fish. And this is just a small temple pool in the river next to a temple where these golden mahseer are. You won't find big fish like this in areas where fishing is allowed. But if you just protect a small area, the fish can kind of find that area and they're able to thrive.
So are those fish staying in that small reserve
Yeah.
most of their lives? They're not migrating to it?
There's a lot of these places, so Southeast Asia, India as well, there's a big difference in rainy season, dry season. So in the dry season, the fish will hunker down in the reserves, and in the rainy season, there'll be 10 times as much water, and the fish seem to spread out. But they're also much harder to catch in the rainy season. But beautiful fish. Yeah, and this was dry season. Like in rainy season, you couldn't film. You couldn't see anything underwater. And then I just added a few slides, given the audience. A lot of these fish are not kept in aquariums. They are very difficult to keep in aquariums because they will get 5 or 6 feet long. But in Thailand, you do see a lot of these species in captivity. This is one example of a monk who has essentially a swimming pool inside the temple. and he has a collection of a lot of these different fish in the temple that he basically, that's his job at the temple, is taking care of these fish. And you see this a lot in Thailand.
Alligators, just go visit Rick.
Oh my God.
So I wanted in this pool, he had river catfish, alligator gar, about 10 different species. Some native, but a lot of exotics as well.
What does he feed them?
That's a good question. Yeah.
He throws pennies in for the small children.
And then another something you see all over the place in Thailand are fishing ponds. And so this is a fishing pond in a beautiful area of Thailand called Krabi. It's in southern Thailand, and at this fishing pond, it's not a big pond, a few acres maybe, and you can catch 100 different kinds of fish, including pretty much every species of giant freshwater fish. And so these fish are bred in Thailand, they're bred in Singapore and Malaysia, and stocked into these fishing ponds, and do very well. They're not able to reproduce, but when they're protected from fishing, I mean, they're not really protected from fishing, but harvest, they do just fine. And this particular fishing pond has like 10 world records for the species. So Arapaima up to like 450 pounds, giant catfish over 200 pounds, giant Siamese carp over 200 pounds. And Jeremy Wade and I both filmed there. And then part of our Wonders of the Mekong project, the students have also started a aquarium display and started keeping fish. So they're out in the field when they have a chance, they come across a rare, smaller ornamental fish, native fish. They'll bring them back to the lab and kind of work to try to understand what their requirements are. So I think we have about 20 species of small native fish in the lab in Cambodia. And then this year, I saw them building it when I was there last time, but this year, behind where this building is, they're gonna start a breeding, so start experimenting with breeding some of these fish. And in Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, breeding of species native to those countries and exotic species is pretty advanced. With a lot of these species, they haven't been bred in captivity before, so it's kind of a learning process. And it's not very common in Cambodia yet, so we'll see how it goes.
Are they sharing the information that they gather somewhere?
Yeah. I don't think they're quite that far along yet, but certainly, our tradition, they're at a university, so they'll publish the information. That would be the ultimate goal. It usually takes a few years. There's a few year delay between the work and then when it gets published, but they're a great group, so I'm sure they'll.
I wasn't sure if they were using forums or chat groups somewhere.
Probably in Khmer, yeah. But so with that, if you'd like to learn more, this book was published last year, talking all about the search for the world's largest freshwater fish. Gives a lot of background about the species, starts kind of giving an introduction, goes around the world, talks about threats and solutions. So please, I guess we have like 20 books available. I'm happy to sign them. I have a few more available at cost for $15 if we run out, but yeah, please check it out, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much again, Zeb, for driving around, bringing the books, making the books. I know that he needs to get on the road pretty quick because there's some inclement weather happening. So we are gonna be doing the drawing for the books, and then anyone who wants to have a chat with him, please do so that he can get ahead of the weather tonight. Not sure how long you're gonna make yourself available for, but please, whatever you need to do.
Okay, and everyone, please stay in your seats. Everyone, get your blue tickets out, and you'll have to read the last 4 numbers. How many are we doing? 2 tickets. She's gonna read it out,
Who?
and then whoever's got the number,
Will we be
hand
able
up,
to
come
hear
up
her
here.
without a microphone?
I think she's
Oh,
got
okay,
it.
just thought I'd ask.
5522. 5539. How many are we doing?
20.
5521. 5